Hey guys, for today's project we're making ring displays and we're going to make them out of these wooden cones. You can purchase the wooden cones already made in most craft stores, or if you can't find them in your area and you have a sander and some wood, you can make them at home pretty easily, and I'll show you how. We're also going to be decorating them, so whether you buy store-bought or make them at home, we're going to have some fun decorating them a variety of ways. We're going to start with making the cones first. So I have this wooden dowel rod. It was a little too long, so I just cut it down with the chop saw. And now I'm marking out how tall I want my cone to be. And so once I have that marked out, I'll just go ahead and start up the sander, and I'm using 50 grit sandpaper right now. And that's going to help take off the bulk of the wood and help get that point going. So you could think of this as being similar to sharpening a pencil. Once you're happy with how the point is shaping up, you can go ahead and switch to a finer grit sandpaper. So I'm using 80 grit now, and then I'm going to switch to 120 grit sandpaper to smooth everything out. And the wood we're working with right now is poplar. It's pretty soft and easy to work with. I'm happy with how the point's coming along, so I'm just going to set this aside and we're going to come back to it and finish cutting it later. So we're going to work with Douglas fir next. It's a little bit harder of a wood, and it's going to take a few more minutes to shave it down, but you just start with a 50 grit, take down the bulk of the wood that way, and then continue to smooth it out with the 80 grit, and then finally the 120 grit. So just the same exact process as before. And you can use any type of wood, any scrap of wood that you have. I just wanted to show you a couple different options, so you don't have to use a dowel rod. You can use a 2x2 like this. You could even use tree branches, or sometimes the hardware stores will have sticks of wood on discount for less than $1. And to give our cone a final smoothing over, I'm going to take 220 grit sandpaper and just kind of give it a once over, and then we're ready to cut. And I'm using our chop saw to cut the cone. If you don't have a chop saw, no problem, you can definitely use a hand saw for this. And if you get any splintering on the bottom from cutting it, just hit it with some sandpaper and you're good. And here Michael's making some cones out of a hardwood. This is ironwood, and these were scraps left over from some logs that we had. And now I'm going to share a variety of ideas for decorating them. We're going to start with making a trio of snow-capped mountains. So right now I'm just taking my painter's tape and smoothing it around the cone. And then I'm going to take Rust-Oleum flat white primer. I'm holding my cone upside down while I spray paint it. And holding it upside down while you're painting it will help prevent the paint from bleeding underneath the tape. And I'll let it dry down for just a minute before I set it down to finish drying. I gave the primer about a half hour to dry, and then we're ready to paint. I'm using Rust-Oleum flat white, and we're just going to repeat the process. And while the paint is still a tiny bit wet, go ahead and remove the tape. You want to remove it before it dries all the way, because otherwise it can tear up some of the paint. And then once they're finished drying, you have a trio of snow-capped mountains to display your rings on. For the next set, I'm going to tape off the top and paint the bottom for a color dipped effect. I'm using this acrylic paint from Decorative. This is Ballerina, and it's a very soft pastel pink. On this next cone, I'm going to prime it and then paint it one of my favorite rose quartz colors. This is Champagne Pink from Rust-Oleum. I love this color so much, but the nozzle on these are not so good. So you just want to be careful as you're using it. It's worth working with it though to get that gorgeous rose quartz color. We're going to be whitewashing this next set of cones. So I have some pine and Douglas fir. So I'm just taking a little of this bare sea salt paint. It was just leftover can from a different project. So just take a little of that in my mixing container and then add a splash of water and just mix that together and then apply it with a rag to your items. I love the natural grain on the pine and Douglas fir. That's why I chose these to have the whitewashing so that grain can still show through. So I did 2 coats of whitewash on the pine and Douglas fir cones. On our next set of cones, I'm going to be using this copper tape, and this is real copper. It's available in gardening centers, usually in the pest control aisle, because it's used to keep slugs and snails off of plants. But it also makes for a very affordable way to do copper leafing. So we're going to be applying it to our cones. On the back of the tape is paper, so you can draw on that and draw out some designs. I drew some triangles and then cut those out and then just peel it off and stick it directly to the wood. It has really good adhesive, so once you get stuck on there, it's not going to want to come off. So just make sure you have the placement right before you really stick it down. And then you can use a card to kind of smooth things out. You could also use decorative hole punches on the tape. I'm just going to use my little single hole punch here and just punch out one dot. And I'm going to put that next to one of my triangles and make it look like the full moon coming up next to the mountain. Let's also make some copper dipped cones. So first we'll cut out a piece of tape that can wrap around the bottom diameter of our cone and then just carefully peel it off the paper. Try not to let it curl too much or bend back when you're peeling the tape. It's better to have the paper bend more because the tape can get really crinkly fast. So just take your time smoothing the tape down, and you can always go back in with the card and smooth down the edges more. And then at the very bottom, if there's any excess or overhang, you can trim that off. Just be careful when you're trimming it with scissors because it can tear. It does tear really easily, so you want to be careful it doesn't tear up the side or anything. And then we'll just take the card and smooth out that bottom edge and flatten it out. We're going to make our next set of cones metallic, so I'm using Montana cans this time, and it's an acrylic primer and spray paint. So I'm going to start with priming, and the key to getting a good shiny metallic finish, aside from the paint that you're using, is priming and sanding repeatedly. I start with 220 grit sandpaper and then 400 to smooth the surface even more. And then I'll brush away any dust from sanding and prime a second time. So our goal is not just to have a white canvas for our paint to pop on, it's actually to fill the pores of the wood and make it so it's as smooth as possible and not porous. We'll sand our cones a second time and then add a third final layer of primer before we paint. When the primer is dry, we're ready to spray paint. So I'm using Montana Can's Gold Chrome. This is one of my favorite gold spray paints. It's highly pigmented, it has great coverage, it's a gorgeous honey gold, it's super shiny metallic, and it has a nice tone to it. So I'm doing one coat, I let that dry, and then go back in, do a second coat. I'm also using Montana Can's Copper Chrome for another set of cones. Montana's Copper Chrome isn't as shiny as the color on the can would lead you to believe, and it's not as shiny as the gold either. So just know that in case you're going out looking for a super shiny metallic copper, this is a little more satiny. And as with any metallic spray paint, it is prone to fingerprints or being marred more easily than other spray paints, so you do want to take a little extra care and be more gentle in handling. Alright guys, and our last and final cones are the ironwood, which we just left all natural because I thought that wood was so pretty. So I will let you guys go. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you like these ideas. Let me know if you did. I love you. Have an awesome day, and I'll see you soon.